You have one decision to make in order to support your life. It is where you stand in society by your political leaning. By Guy Lakeman. There are quite a few questions you need to be certain about, so I take the opportunity to outline some critical questions that appear quite often in sociological policy discussions here with some comments. This list allows for the next installment of blending and regrouping into the Venn diagram of how the various policies demonstrated here overlap. This is what we need to see from political parties and their manifestos with added graphics, for after all, if you can't draw it you can't do it. It is very important to remember in a large and growing society to not just vote for yourself as encouraged by the selfish right wing, but you should vote for the people around you, because if they become unsettled they will make your life a misery from which you cannot escape. If you have a business that is in operation for profit, either for your greedy self or to fund research, why would you vote for a political party that wishes to support more businesses that will reduce your market by taking customers from you and reduce your profit and potentially bankrupt you? If you are an educated businessman, you would look at the big picture and vote for some kind of social control over the market that makes it completely free and open to opportunist or dominant monopoly abuse. Unfortunately, some political parties take their control over the market to use public tax money to support their friends when they fail, example in Italian banking and 2008 bank support with public money, so putting pressure on all levels who work to support society. Politics is no longer considered the traditional left or right that was developed by the French in 1789, but now the world has changed dramatically since then, and to follow those traditions is futile, as we now have a three-dimensional appearance with three axes of X: economic, left versus right; Y: authority, authoritarian versus libertarian; Z: government involvement, low versus high. However, it is easier to absorb politics in a two-dimensional plan of two axes. Horizontal, left and right axis in two parts, denoting a blend of a spread of economic position between equality versus wealth, share versus selfish; a spread of societal position of values between progress versus traditional; vertical, top and bottom axis denoting a blend of a spread of civil position between authority versus liberty; a spread of diplomatic position between national versus global. It must be realized that liberty is often confused with socialist left-leaning politics, but in this case left-leaning politics is a blend of economic equality and progressive society, and libertarian denotes a global freedom of choice to be compared with strict authoritarian insular patriotic national control. 36 economic questions. This is expressed as equality versus wealth, share versus selfish. On the horizontal left-right axis, to best start any comparison it is necessary to look at attitude towards the economic axis of the cost of supplying basic needs such as water, food, shelter and transport in order to work and communication to spread the productivity. The basics of a sustainable community, and who selfishly wants to steal from it to support their antisocial childish greed. Oppression by corporations is more of a concern than oppression by governments. When the corporate for-profit paradigm starts to enter the rule of law, the cost center society suffers first. People are ultimately divided more by class than by nationality. This is a level of inequality that has been instigated since the caste system of India moved west into Egypt and slavery, and then north into a range of religious division that caused wars. Ensuring economic equality is an important function of government. It is the purpose of government to administer a progressive community. Progress is not achieved by creating misery through inequality, but by placing suitably qualified resources in qualified positions. Regulation of businesses for the public interest is worth sacrificing economic growth. This is a necessity to stop extortion and other factors. Economic growth is a dangerous direction in a planet with limited resources that will run out in the waste-all economy of debt with no collateral or resources to support the debt, and so a fantasy, a direction towards the cyclic economic growth model is required. Controlling inflation is more important than controlling unemployment. This is the Phillips curve, describing a historical inverse relationship between rates of unemployment and corresponding rates of inflation that results within an economy. Rising inflation lowers unemployment to the limit of overproduction and market saturation, but rising inflation puts up prices so purchasing grinds to a halt. Lowering inflation raises unemployment so the unemployed starve. A balance must be achieved, which is done by allowing the market to decide. Government intervention is only effective in a one-off situation. As in Keynes' original move, to continue interference causes economic disaster and out-of-step devaluation and unsupported debt with devalued collateral. Because corporations cannot be trusted to voluntarily protect the environment, they require regulation. An unfortunate truth. It is necessary for the government to intervene in the economy to protect consumers. This is necessary until the whole of the society is educated to follow a sustainable circular economy. The freer the markets, the freer the people. This is an old chestnut. A free market means people are free to engage in more different types of economic activity without regulation or restriction. An increase in choice is necessary for development and evolutionary diversity. Choice is different to competition of one product against another, which is often detrimental to both. Choice provides for innovative alternatives to appear. It is better to maintain a balanced budget than to ensure welfare for all citizens. Welfare for all citizens is imperative in an efficient community. To unbalance a budget can create a sick society, which is a health hazard. Welfare programs tend to make it easy for people to choose not to work. Only if the welfare programs are lax and not monitoring its recipients well enough, and so failing them, welfare is necessary for many reasons but not for refusal to work. Publicly funded research is more beneficial to the people than leaving it to the market. The public is the market, so it should be the public that should be collating and analyzing statistics, etc. International trade is beneficial. International trade is beneficial to create variety, but as long as imports are converted to exports or imports are balanced with local produce goods and a bottom line balance, otherwise the community runs at a loss and becomes a slave to debt. We should end government barriers to international free trade, even if it makes it harder for locals to compete in some industries. Any community should protect its local group. Free trade can destroy local production. From each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. Another old chestnut that means everyone has their place and should not be discriminated due to ability. Those who have positions of higher responsibility or ability in the workplace or ownership should not demand more from the production group. It's a sad reflection on our society that something as basic as drinking water is now a bottled, branded consumer product. Basic needs of water, food, shelter, transport, communication, etc. should never be subject to psychological marketing sales influence that sells based on psychological brand pressure, a 10-cent cup of coffee sling for $5 or a sports juggler or media agitator hoarding $1 billion. Land shouldn't be a commodity to be bought and sold. Land is a fundamental basic need for food and shelter and requires the same respect and not be commodity for psychological manipulation. It is regrettable that many personal fortunes are made by people who simply manipulate money and contribute nothing to their society. This is the sorry state of a society misdirected by an unhinged interest-based economy and governments filled with corporate-appointed members who wish to make money without physical input. The only social responsibility of a company should be to deliver a profit to its shareholders. This is where society collapses, as the responsibility is to provide good products to the market. To create a monetary value to shareholders or investors goes beyond the fundamental principle of why a company should exist. Protectionism is sometimes necessary in trade. This question covers the necessity to protect against monopoly destruction of innovation. Governments should penalize businesses that mislead the public. This used to be in place with government inspecting all advertising before publication but has been removed since the 1980s. A genuine free market requires restrictions on the ability of predator multinationals to create monopolies. This is required as monopolies destroy innovation so as to maintain their market and profit. A new shop that pulls away their consumers destroys their profit, so they absorb it and close it down. Generally speaking, corporations make too much profit. Too much profit is a sign of theft, It is not a general situation, especially with NPOs who put any potential profit into direct action for reinvesting in their own sustainability and research, etc. It would be best if social programs were abolished in favor of private charity. Private charities are wasteful, not all donations get to the needy, and remove the responsibility of the government that should be addressing and supporting social programs. Too much wealth is concentrated in the hands of a few large companies and individuals. Hoarding by the promotion of selfish greed on media is a global disaster, with a greedy few owning more than the rest put together. The huge rise in billionaires is a social disaster and proof of a world gone very wrong indeed. In UK 10% of population own 45% of national wealth, which is hideous on a global scale. It is worse, as many humanitarian concerned institutions have shown us. The question to ask is, if they own so much, where did it come from? It has been stolen from the many. Taxes should be increased on the rich to provide for the poor. Another old chestnut. This is required when wealth tax has not been implemented to stop hoarding and removal of the material which allows business to circulate, namely money. The poor would not exist if hoarding was curtailed and money circulated. There is no restriction on earning a lot, but spend it and put it back. The more you earn, the higher your tax rate should be. This should not necessarily be aimed at the poor, but to put money back into the system and to pay for the basic needs of community infrastructure. Earnings tax is a destructive entity that destroys the salary to purchasing power of individuals, that keeps business ticking, and the tax question should be directed towards taxing luxuries and not basics, and taxing wealth to reduce hoarding and keeping money in circulation, and so no need to print more and devalue the society. Generally speaking, we should cut both taxes and government spending. Government spending on necessary basic needs infrastructure should be balanced with taxing what is available to be taxed that has been withdrawn from the community by hoarders whose selfish greed gives the name wealthy or filthy rich. Inheritance is a legitimate form of wealth. Wealthy should distribute before death. Public utilities like roads and electricity should be publicly owned. This question addresses the area of the community basic needs and should be community-driven and supported and serviced by the community. Excessive government intervention is a threat to the economy. This again has recently proved to destroy the economy by creating excessive public debt, with global derivative debt being some $1,000 trillion, showing global trade to be bankrupt as there is no collateral to support the debt, as we saw in 2008 when public funds were used to prop up bank failure, which they are doing again in continued Italian bank failure. The primary responsibility for retirement savings should be on individuals rather than government programs like Social Security. The government should be providing the very basic needs of retirement based on acreage of land to provide sufficient food and shelter for a stress-free end to their lives. Any top-up by an individual with investment in food and other basic needs supply etc. should be the responsibility of the individual. Those with the ability to pay should have access to higher standards of medical care. This should be applied to those who wish to pay above that provided by the necessary social security required to maintain a healthy community. Those paying more for healthcare should not receive better care. From the basic social healthcare payment paid by all, those who wish to open extra healthcare can pay more and obviously get more over and above the basics. This will also improve the facilities available at basic level, and nobody should be restricted at all from emergency care. I support single-payer, universal healthcare. This is the social security used to maintain a healthy community, like refuse collection, water supply, fire service, etc. etc. Quality education is a right of all people. A well-educated community makes good, sound, informed decisions and can discern truth from myth or fake news. The means of production should belong to the workers who use them. Another old chestnut. However, if all members of a productive group work together, ownership is part of that productive community. The question of ownership is related to an old and unhealthy religious paradigm. 45 Societal questions. This is expressed as progress versus traditional. The additional aspect of the horizontal left-right axis is the left-leaning policy of a progressive society supporting education and training to think, challenged by the religious traditional right wing who propose belief before reason. Astrology accurately explains many things. What astrology accurately explains is how gullible people can be if the astrology is taken to extreme small detail. However, from antiquity astrology has been used to paint broad groups based on weather and how people react to it, and was the beginning of belief in the sky deity or mythological fairy family. You cannot be moral without being religious. Religion teaches its own sectarian morality, which is dangerous as religion creates conflicting morals. What is required is a firm foundation in ethics. Charity is better than social security as a means of helping the genuinely disadvantaged. This is covered in question 18 above but repeated here. Private charities are wasteful and remove the responsibility of the government that should be addressing and supporting social programs. Some people are naturally unlucky. If it wasn't for bad luck, I wouldn't have no luck at all. Is just a cop-out. The probability of events is the same for all. People aren't unlucky. They just make decisions that aren't good for them and do bad things that come right back at them. This is part of the education above and the necessity to educate in risk analysis, risk mitigation and strategic analysis. Children should be educated in religious or traditional values. It is important that my child's school instills religious values. This is a level of indoctrination as religious studies are heavily biased and teach belief rather than analysis of facts and events to determine repeatability from different perspectives and so a level of truth. In journalistic editing this is called second sourcing rather than publishing a dreamed-up uneducated analysis. This method of teaching is dangerous as it creates sheeple people. Traditions are of no value on their own. Traditions need to be balanced and matched against current events, so are no value if applied indiscriminately on their own. Religion should play a role in government. Government above all needs to apply ethics as mentioned above. Religion creates diverse conflicting morals that cannot be trusted. Churches should be taxed the same way other institutions are taxed. Churches are no different to any other social political meeting place and so should not be given preferential treatment, as favoritism is the most disgusting discrimination of all. Climate change is currently one of the greatest threats to our way of life. However climate change is causing a selection of extremes and global weather events. These extremes are increasing in severity and so are imposing severe changes in many areas of life. Slowing global warming is worth potentially reducing economic growth. Global warming is now inevitable as the glacial ice melting has triggered a self-warming program of nature. To slow it by man is futile. What is required is contingency plans and action to adapt to global warming. Adaptation is how evolution progresses. Those who will not adapt go extinct. Economic growth can increase if a circular economy is accepted. It is important that we work as a united world to combat climate change. Climate change is no different than any other aspect of global change. The change in climate, requiring mitigating contingencies to be formulated rather than try and combat nature, which is futile, is no more important than correcting a failed economy to move towards a circular economy that addresses recycling and waste reuse rather than extend the debt-ridden waste economy that government appear to feared to address. Society was better many years ago than it is now. In many ways post-World War II and pre the 1970s government-sanctioned breakdown of standards was more progressive and geared to a positive society than it is in 2017. It is important that we maintain the traditions of our past. Most traditions of the past are steeped in the antisocial master-slave paradigm and religious ownership and fief payments. So to maintain those is socially destructive and a crime against evolution. We as humans as a biological entity have evolved past the Victorian right-wing Darwinian survival of the fittest to evolve into an intellectually adapting entity. Well, some have. We don't see that in the dumbed-down populist voting of 2017. It is important that we think in the long term, beyond our lifespans. This is an imperative of survival. Biological reproduction may be the prime mover for the existence of life in general, but for humans we need to think. And be trained to do so rather than dig our heads in the sands of belief. Reason is more important than maintaining our culture. Advanced humans have developed reason to differentiate themselves from apes, Culture is a set of ethnic animal behavior rituals that are no longer required in the evolution of humans. Drug use should be legalized or decriminalized. It would be better that law enforcement were concentrated on theft, violence and social terror offenses than the drug areas, which should be dealt with by paramedics and health officials. Adults should be able to choose what they put in their bodies. We should repeal all laws prohibiting adult possession and use of soft drugs and focus less on law enforcement and more on treatment for the use of hard drugs. The important word is choice here. What is required is educated responsibility in all cases, and an uneducated society is not able to choose rationally. Possessing marijuana for personal use should not be a criminal offense. This relates to the above question with the same answer. Same-sex marriage should be legal. Marriage is a rule of law legal entity which invokes tax freedom and family cohesion. It is no longer a vague device of eugenic religious ritual to create their own master race. Government shouldn't interfere with people marrying whoever they love just because of the traditional view of marriage, even if it means more than one husband or wife. Traditions restrict the progress of social groups. Even if someone wishes to marry the dog next door, the majority probably won't. A same-sex couple in a stable, loving relationship should not be excluded from the possibility of child adoption. This is obvious for the good placement of childhood education. No cultures are superior to others. Our race has many superior qualities, compared with other races. This really is a question that invokes pompous superiority ownership issues. The problem being is how superior is qualified and quantified both subjectively and objectively. Remembering race is a physical difference that is a biologically unchangeable as is sex, and any culture is an ethnic, sociological, political, economic difference, showing us race and culture are not to be compared. Systematic racial discrimination is a primary reason why many minorities can't get ahead these days. Racial discrimination, sexual discrimination, qualification discrimination, or any discrimination is primarily based on financial class discrimination and class favoritism, the worst discrimination of all. To say an unqualified minority cannot get ahead is like discriminating against a herd of elephants because they can't climb trees, or a man because he can't get pregnant and have a child. Class oppression of all kinds needs to be removed, but minorities should not be put in places they are not qualified to attend. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. This appears obvious, but unless the enemy of your enemy is well known to you, he may also be your enemy. Sex outside marriage is immoral. This applies to vague morals and not ethics. So is void question, and so is not immoral. Pornography, depicting consenting adults, should be legal for the adult population. This requires a definition of pornography, as pornography = high has a wide definition including sadomasochism, and the depiction of violence should be regulated. It is not in current game systems. What goes on in a private bedroom between consenting adults is no business of the state. This is vague, as killing someone or breaking the law in private or not always involves the state. No one can feel naturally homosexual. Homosexuality is a psychological state. Psychological development is nurture, not nature. These days openness about sex has gone too far. The more anything is discussed and researched, the better it is for all concerned. If we accept migrants at all, it is important that they assimilate into our culture. First-generation immigrants can never be fully integrated within their new country. Inbred culture is different to lose when first entering a new environment, but in order to be accepted and enjoy the new environment, it is imperative to become part of it and not dress, eat or behave in a way alien to that environment. The formation of ghettos to assimilate and feel comfortable is fully acceptable, but to try and change the host environment is tantamount to invasion. We should require all immigrants to learn to speak English in order to preserve traditional customs and values. Speaking the local language is the first step towards integration. However, to preserve traditions is not a path towards progress. Abortion should be prohibited in most or all cases. Abortion, when the woman's life is not threatened, should always be illegal. This is another old chestnut. Abortion should be legal to stop unwanted children in an already overpopulated world. This issue is involved with killing and combines with the necessity for capital punishment for heinous acts. Many political parties fall apart as their standing is mixed, allowing abortion but against execution, and vice versa, giving out a mixed-up message. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. This is a fair approximation. Those who steal should not be allowed to go free and have everything taken from them. Those who kill be executed. Taxpayers should not be expected to prop up any theaters or museums that cannot survive on a commercial basis. Artistic development is the challenge that science requires to evolve, and so is a responsibility of the community. School should not make classroom attendance compulsory. Education should be compulsory, and so attendance is imperative. All people have their rights, but it is better for all of us that different sorts of people should keep to their own kind. This allows the preservation of diversity that is the food of evolution. Good parents sometimes have to spank their children. A level of discipline has to start somewhere. It's natural for children to keep some secrets from their parents, and parents to keep secrets from children. The prime function of schooling should be to equip the future generation to find jobs. The prime purpose of education is to teach thinking and reason. Jobs are found by filtering the skills of the young while they are absorbing education. People with serious inheritable disabilities should not be allowed to reproduce. Responsible adults with serious inheritable disabilities should be educated to make those decisions. The most important thing for children to learn is to accept discipline. Self-discipline is most important in life. Those who are able to work, and refuse the opportunity, should not expect society's support. If you don't support the society, why try and ask for support from it? When you are troubled, it's better not to think about it, but to keep busy with more cheerful things. If the situation persists, then get medical treatment. What's good for the most successful corporations is always, ultimately, good for all of us. Good corporations produce good products that the market requires, so therefore good for us. No broadcasting institution, however independent its content, should receive public funding. Of course, otherwise it is marked as a government propaganda machine, as are commercial broadcasters who pander to corporate sponsorship and advertising. 14 Civil questions. This is expressed as authority versus liberty. The main factor for the vertical axis is based on questions concerning acceptance of strict dictatorial authority at the top, or need for it, and the libertarian freedom of choice, which without control at its left extreme creates hermits, and on the right is the mob anarchy of bandits and attitude of grab what you can theft. Hate groups must be protected from government censorship. In order for comparison to be made, those who hate need to be exposed, so not censored. Gun ownership should be prohibited for those without a valid reason. Absolutely. A gun is a dangerous object. It's more important to allow law-abiding citizens to own guns than it is to reduce the total number of guns available. This again allows those who have good reason to protect themselves without causing dissent. However, if so, penalties for gun violence should be increased to exile status. We need to be willing to give up some privacy and freedom in order to be safe from terrorism. Terrorists are a threat to social well-being, so to catch them we must freeze them out by restricting free movement and so privacy. Only those who are guilty may be afraid. I support single-payer, universal healthcare. Social Security maintains healthy community like refuse collection, water supply, fire service, etc. etc. Prostitution should be illegal. I see no reason why prostitution should not be legal. Most people sell themselves in one way or another in order to gain employment. Manual sex is no different. Maintaining family values is essential. Family values are necessary, but community values are more essential. Family values lead on to a community conscience. To chase progress at all costs is dangerous. Anything at all cost is extreme and is dangerous. Progress is necessary but not when extreme. Progress requires good leadership with a leader who sets the pace and allows the team to make the choice of direction. Genetic modification is a force for good, even on humans. Research is necessary, so can be considered good. However, genetic modification can lead to dangerous anomalies, so needs to be controlled. We should open our borders to immigration. Open borders lead to unhealthy movements, so need controls. Migration is an evolutionary necessity. However, migration and integration to create new diversity must not be confused with invasion or colonialism without diversity modification for the purpose of stealing what the host has achieved. Governments should be as concerned about foreign citizens as they are about those within their borders. Governments should be concerned about everybody under their administration. All people, regardless of factors like culture or sexuality, should be treated equally. The only caveat to this is if the culture or sex is viscous, antisocial and delinquent to the general community. There are no savage and civilized peoples, there are only different cultures. Yes, some cultures are savage, some are civilized, as culture is a learned factor, culture is ethnic nurture rather than nature. It is important that we further my group's goals above all others. Absolutely not all groups need to mix goals in order for evolutionary adaptation to take place. 18 Diplomatic questions. This is expressed as national versus global. The secondary factor for the vertical axis is based on questions concerning patriotic nationalism and global integration. It is important to consider that nationalism, steeped in traditional cultural rituals, has a potential for war and far from the support of a village community which should be self-sufficient and self-responsible and prepared to have an attractive transitive neighborly relationship. Both nationalism and being neighborly on a global and local scale require different attitudes which impact the vertical scale of authority versus liberty. Authority being national dictatorial and global having wider liberty. The United Nations should be abolished. The UN is ineffectual and is an expensive waste at over $3 trillion a year to house failed and ineffectual government politicians who have no global power or strength. Military action by our nation is often necessary to protect it. A defense system is imperative not only to quell invasion from delinquent groups but to maintain local infrastructure. Military action that defies international law is sometimes justified. To defy international law requires action on the land of others and must not take place without justification and authorization. However, rules of engagement are futile when the situation has been allowed to get uncontrollable. There is now a worrying fusion of information and entertainment. Infotainment has blurred truth and reality and is a severe threat to trust through pseudoscience and fake science and fictional history based on a false reality to mythology. I support regional unions, such as the European Union. Regional agreements are fine, but a so-called union like the EU is a disaster as it is a layered compilation of a headless creature that issues laws to the group, no more than a fascist regime that World War II was supposed to remove but actually was replaced. The EU has grown too big and so is a disastrous failure like a peer in history of empires and monopolies who show that big is bad. It is important to maintain our national sovereignty. There is no valid reason for this other than to maintain border controls. Nationalist too big and reeks of some antiquated greed-driven ownership by those who don't own it. Responsible village and town sovereignty is important. A united world government would be beneficial to mankind. This has proved to be ineffectual by the so-called United Nations. It is more important to retain peaceful relations than to further our strength. Peace creates strength. Wars do not need to be justified to other countries. Civil wars not but wars between countries are only justified if one tries it on with an invasion. Military spending is a waste of money. A waste if not spent on defense and providing a group to maintain local infrastructure. International aid is a waste of money. If the aid money is required locally, it is more than a waste. Aid money is for emergency contingencies and an annual handout like welfare to a waster nation that needs to show it can pull its socks up. My nation is great. A very short-sighted statement. No nation is great as all have foibles, some worse than others. Research should be conducted on an international scale. Sharing of research is important for global progress. Governments should be accountable to the international community. Most definitely. Even when protesting an authoritarian government, violence is not acceptable. Violence is never acceptable. My religious values should be spread as much as possible. There is never ever a valid reason for this. Religion is a war creator through his use of belief and ignorance and denial of rational thought. Our laws should enforce traditional Judeo-Christian morals and values. Absolutely not. Religious oppression and discrimination by favoritism is socially destructive, especially by religions that have been historically responsible for many massive war deaths and persecutions, especially religions that have a rule book instigating death and punishment to those who don't follow their rules. Our nation's values should be spread as much as possible. That is an antiquated colonial belief that has proved to having been globally destructive. Summary. Many of the policy questions above need collating, as this document covers most of any respectable manifesto situations without going too far into specifics. For example, questions are still to be asked on severity of rehabilitation. Is this an infringement on liberty or a need for education in a rehabilitation workforce? The Gulag-type Victorian workhouses are not acceptable as educational establishments. Watch this space, it is not over yet. Smile.